You know that feeling when you finally decide to upgrade your streaming setup, only to discover the cheap plug-and-play PTZ you bought a month ago freezes on you the first time the lighting shifts or the subject moves just a little? I've been there, and I've also watched enough YouTube tutorials and forum threads to know that most budget PTZ units are built for static shots in perfect light, not the real-world chaos of a live event or a classroom. The question is whether the Chameye 4K NDI PTZ camera feels like a smarter buy, or if it's just another shiny box that will end up gathering dust. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the biggest hesitation most buyers have with PTZ gear is the learning curve. You're looking at a camera that can pan, tilt, and zoom remotely, and suddenly you're not just worrying about framing a shot, you're also juggling firmware menus, network settings, and a joystick you've never used before. That's why I spent a solid weekend setting this thing up in two very different environments, a small church livestream and a backyard wildlife stream. I wanted to see if the promise of advanced AI auto-tracking actually translates into a camera that can keep a speaker in focus when they wander, or a bird in the sky when it darts around. The Chameye packs a 2.8-inch sensor with 20x optical zoom and 16x digital zoom, outputting a clean 4K 60 frames per second signal over NDI HX3. For a creator who already uses NDI in a production workflow, that's a huge time saver. No need for a capture card, the video streams directly into OBS, vMix, or any NDI-compatible software. The included M500 video switcher and PTZ controller make it feel like a mini production hub. You literally have a 4-directional joystick, focus ring, and zoom lever all in one box, so you don't have to run a separate console or buy a third-party controller. In practice, that means I could sit at my desk, switch between two camera angles, and cue a zoom on the pastor's face without ever leaving my chair. Now, let's talk autofocus confidence. The AI auto-tracking advertises both face and body detection, and in my tests it actually held a speaker's head steady even when they turned to the side or leaned over a podium. The focus didn't hunt like some cheaper PTZ units that lose the subject every few seconds. That reliability matters if you're doing a live sermon where a slip in focus can feel unprofessional. The auto-framing also kept the subject centered, which saved me from constantly adjusting the joystick midstream. Low-light behavior is where many PTZ cameras stumble. The Chameye sensor isn't the size of a cinema-grade camera, but the 4K 60 frames per second mode kept noise relatively low down to about 1000 lux. In the church's dimly lit sanctuary, the picture stayed usable, though there was a slight softening of fine details. If you're planning to shoot in near-dark conditions, think a theater production or nighttime wildlife, don't expect the same level of clarity you'd get from a dedicated low-light camera. The camera does have an IR cut filter that can be removed for night vision, but you'll need external IR lighting to get a clean image. Stabilization is another practical concern. Since the unit is mounted on a tripod or ceiling rig, there's no in-body sensor shift. The smoothness of the pan and tilt comes from the motor's design and the controller's joystick. In my church test, the movements were fluid enough that viewers didn't notice any jerkiness. However, if you try to use the zoom while panning quickly, the motor can produce a faint wobble. It's not a deal-breaker for most live streams, but if you need rock-steady motion for a sports broadcast, you might want a higher-end model with built-in stabilization. One of the biggest advantages of the Chameye is the all-in-one approach. You don't have to buy a separate lens kit because the camera's 20x optical zoom covers most scenarios from wide-angle stage shots to close-up details on a speaker's notes. That said, the lens ecosystem is locked. You can't swap out the optics for a prime lens, which would be a limitation for a cinematographer looking for specific depth-of-field control. If you're a hobbyist who wants a single device that can handle a variety of framing needs, this is perfect. If you're a professional who expects interchangeable lenses, you'll have to look elsewhere. Menu friction is surprisingly low. The on-screen display walks you through network configuration step by step, and the controller has dedicated buttons for NDI stream start-stop, which cut down on the usual "where's the output" panic. The biggest hiccup I ran into was the initial firmware update. The process required a wired Ethernet connection and a PC to run the update utility. Once that was done, the camera ran smoothly. It's not a deal-breaker, but first-time PTZ owners should budget an extra 20 minutes for that step. Battery confidence isn't really a factor here because the camera is meant to be plugged into mains power. The